Brad's point was, if it's a hobby, whatever you choose, it might be knitting, it might be woodwork, it might be making knives. No, there's so many things. It might be powerlifting, it might be something like this. And that if you make it a hobby, it's very easy for you to go, I don't feel like doing that today, or I don't feel like this is a good use of my time. And his argument is, if it's a practice and you're trying to get 1% better every day, then that's actually infinitely more productive and useful to not just yourself but other people. Something like that. Shock Absorber podcast. My name is Joel, and it's great to have you along on this. What do we always say? This journey, this podcast
adventure
experience.
I've been thinking about adventures.
Have you?
Yeah.
Hello, Tim.
Hello.
Welcome. It's just
Thank
you
you.
and I on the podcast today.
It is.
Great to have you with us.
Stu's on a different adventure this morning.
Yes, he is.
Yes, and can't be on this adventure.
He's on a different vehicle of adventure articulation. Welcome back. And you've been on adventures. You've been reading about adventures.
I've been thinking about adventures. Yeah. So I've been. So coming up soon, I'm going to be speaking at a kids' camp, Square One, which we've talked about before.
Lovely.
We're doing the theme of new creation, and I started thinking about how to get the kids engaged with the topic. And so I thought every kid nowadays reads heaps of books, obviously. So I'd start with some books. That was a bit facetious. Sorry.
I was going to say
yeah.
Well, the thing is that my family does.
Well, yes, and my family do too,
Yeah.
but it may not be generically true.
Yeah.
But one of my favourite series growing up was the Enid Blyton Adventure series. So Island of Adventure, Sea of Adventure, Mountain of Adventure. And I just started thinking about that. Part of what I wanted to communicate, this is just kind of the opening talk, setting the scene, is the idea that we love stories. And the first time we read stories, we're really looking forward to how the story ends. But sometimes we re-watch a movie or we reread a story and we're excited because we know how it ends.
Yep.
And so we're rereading again. And so I've got these examples of, this was my favourite book when I was in primary school, was reading these Enid Blyton books over and over and over again. I've read them so many times. And so I'm using that to link into, well, we know how the Bible story ends. We know how our story ends in new creation. And so we're reading this weekend, we're going to be reading the God story.
That's great.
Anyway, as part of that, I used some AI magic to, the prompt was, make me a book cover as if it's a 1980s Puffin, I think that was Puffin version, of the Adventure series, but the new creation of adventure rather than, it was excellent. It's hilarious.
Good?
Yeah, it looks great. Yeah, it's very, very fun. I'll send it to you so you can maybe chuck it in the
Wish
YouTube.
I was hearing these talks.
It's going to be really fun, yeah. And I was writing one yesterday about what new creation is going to be like, and I just got really excited. I was just by myself at the computer typing, and I just got almost overwhelmed by how super exciting new creation is going to be, and just hanging out with God and in His world that He has made. And the analogy that came to mind was when your kids come home from school and they've made something and they're really proud to show it off.
Yep.
They're just like, look what I made, look what I made. Like, imagine hanging out with God and He's like, hey, Tim.
Check this out.
Check this. Check out the platypus. I made that. How good is that? Yeah. And you go with God out into the outback and you lie down on the red earth and you look up at the constellations and God's there lying next to you, go, I made that.
Every single one.
I made that. And I just thought, I just got super excited by it.
That's cool.
It was very cool. Anyway, that's the adventure. I've been thinking about new creation of adventure. Yeah.
I don't mind going on adventures. There's always some story to tell afterwards, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right.
It's like when you, talking about kids, you go on holidays and you're like, holidays with kids can be a bit tough, especially if they're young. You're like, this isn't a holiday. This is not what a holiday I'm used to. And I would, I remember saying to some other dads, like, it's not a holiday, is it? And they're like, nah. But then you just think back 3 years ago and you're like, that was a great time.
Yeah.
It's because you only remember the good parts about it.
Or, and we've said this to our kids before, we'll have a great time or we'll have a terrible time and it'll make a great story.
Yeah. And we're still all doing it together.
We're still all doing it together.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what's cool about it. I actually really appreciate that more as I become an old man. And noticing it's like actually making memories is the important part.
Yeah.
And I know that you've talked about collective memory and how that plays out in families, but not just families, churches as well. But before we get to I think we will get onto that a little bit, you've been doing some other reading as well. You just said to me before, I do too much reading.
Yes.
Which I don't know if that's true. You too much reading or not deep enough reading?
I get, I don't think I am clinically or diagnosably ADHD, but when it comes to topics of interest, I just have endless curiosity. I could pretty much read anything and be curious about it. And that can sometimes be at my detriment, that I just read too many weird things or
you get too wide, is that?
I just
too much breadth.
Too much breadth. And what I don't do, and I know in principle I should do, is spend more time digesting a smaller quantity of better quality things rather than just a lot of things. So a lot of podcasts and a lot of Substack articles or a lot of news articles, and I probably don't need that much noise. I probably need to limit. But it's also one of the things that makes me excited about new creation. It's because there'll be eternity. I'll never run out of time
to learn things.
I find that really exciting. And that might not excite everyone. It really excites me that there are things I don't yet understand about this world, and I'll have time to explore all of them.
Why do you think you have that desire to read, in your words, too widely?
I don't know. I don't know why God has made me curious about things. I mean, it's partly nurture and nature, like everything. I think, my parents enjoyed reading. Dad took us to the library almost every weekend and just let us loose. Come back with your pile in half an hour.
Only 2 non-fiction books are the same topic, though.
Was that a rule?
That was a rule, yeah.
Oh, right.
You're only allowed to borrow 2 non-fiction books of the same genre or topic kind of thing.
Yeah. Was that a library rule or is that your family rule?
No, that was a library rule.
Okay.
As I understood it, because I didn't violate it, but they're like, you can't borrow that many books.
Oh, right. Okay, there you go. So we did that regularly, and it wasn't. I think the other important thing in terms of modelling, that us as kids weren't the only ones borrowing. Like Dad would walk out with his massive stack of books, and he would have varied things, and things that now are not the things I'm interested in. So Dad's, he's into motorsports, he's into electronics, he's into computers, all these kind of things that are not at all my interest. So I haven't picked up interest from him, but I think I've picked up from him curiosity and be interested in different topics and read widely. So, I think that's part of why I do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. But you have been reading a particular book.
Yes. So I'm trying to read which one are we talking about?
Oh, you told me you're reading the Tony Abbott book.
Oh, yes. I've been reading Tony Abbott's history book. It's called Australia, a history.
Wow. What an enlightening title. They spent a lot of time in the publishing room figuring that title out, didn't they?
Yeah, I'm sure that went through lots of revisions. So Australia, a history. What is interesting, and this is kind of where we go with the conversation, is the subtitle, how an ancient land became a great democracy.
Right.
And so what has been curious for me, and this again is where I've been probably I should have just spent more time reading the book rather than thinking about the book, but I was thinking about the different ways we tell stories and the positive and negative or mixed way in which we engage with particular topics. And so Tony Abbott's book is a very positive story of Australia, and has some critical notes, but is largely this, and that's why the subtitle is interesting. Ancient land becomes a great democracy. So it's a story of growth, it's a story of progress, it's a story of success. And so there's a particular framing of the story that is there. And there's lots of other things that I've read over the years and engaged with, which have the much more negative story. And then from the late 80s, I think it was the late 80s, there was the history wars. So this was sort of an academic, and then it became popular level conversation about how do we frame the story of Australia? Is it a largely successful, positive project, which would therefore forefront a lot of the sort of European aspects of the society, sometimes the sort of a great man version of history, sometimes talked about, or do we give the more critical aspect? And so there's a very critical, sometimes called the black armband version of Australian history, which is let's raise up the voices that have been largely suppressed. So let's raise up more Indigenous voices, let's raise up more feminist voices, let's raise up more post-colonial sort of theories. And so this is sitting in this world, and that's what I started pondering as I was reading the book, was wondering about this ways that we tell stories, which stories we tell, why we tell them, ones that are the opposite to black armband apparently is called Three Cheers history, or a celebratory sort of history. And again, as I think about, okay, so what I'm really curious about how we form identity and formation, values formation, sense of who we are. So all this kind of collective memory stuff that I've been talking about recently. And what is the role of celebratory history versus critical black armband history in the way that we come across formation? And so that was some of the things that were curious to me during the week.
You talk about the white armband and black armband thing, and it just makes me think, why do we, as maybe humans, respond to this such divisive nature? Like, even when we use the term white armband, black armband, it's like you're on one side or the other.
Yes.
And we've talked about before many times how, your social media algorithms will push you either side of a political divide, for example, or a divide of some other issue. So what do you think, because I know that you've been like kind of grappling with this about the celebratory or the critical, like why do you think that we have to have one or the other? Why can't we think about, why does it have to be either or rather than yes and or both?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That was a lot of words. A lot of noises, not a lot of words.
Me or you?
Me.
I thought you were just saying that was a lot of old tosh.
No, tosh. I love the word tosh. Complexity is hard.
Yes. Nuance is hard.
Nuance is hard. There's a phrase that I'm struggling to pull out of my head. Cognitive dissonance. It's hard for us to fit into so we all have frameworks of thinking. And this is where this collective memory, I think, kind of feeds into this. Our collective memory feeds our values. And we have frameworks of thinking based on the collective memory, the stories we tell ourselves, and therefore the values that we have out of that. And to complicate and complexify those values by putting in a story that challenges that and creates this cognitive dissonance that we struggle to deal with. And so one of the things that psychologists have found is that rather than dealing with cognitive dissonance, we will justify a way. We'll find a way within our collective story that we're holding on to justify or ignore or push aside contrary facts or contrary opinions. So if we have this really celebratory history of how wonderful Australia is, then the voices that have a more critical opinion, it's tough to work out how to fit that in. What do we, and we've seen, this is an issue that we saw with around the Black Lives Matter kind of movement and the pulling down of statues that happened in, firstly, America, Britain. We saw a little bit of it in Australia that I don't think we probably don't have as long enough a history to have seen as much going on. But here are these statues of people that we have celebrated and are significant for our the nation's founding. So statues of, people in those countries, and a counter narrative comes and says, we're celebrating this person, but they had some negative character traits, or they, here is someone who was a founding father of America, but also owned slaves. How do we reconcile that? And the easy answer is to say, well, let's ignore the slavery. Look at all the amazing things that they did in terms of founding who we are today. Or no, ignore the positives and they're only a villain. So there's this white hat, black hat kind of dichotomy.
Black armband, yeah.
Yeah, white armband, black armband. So, Captain Cook was either, a genius and brilliant at, quote unquote, discovering Australia and communicating that to Britain and, therefore setting in motion, Australia as a penal colony, or he was a evil, devilish, colonialist, and all the things we package into that, and it's one or the other. And so it's very hard for those who have a black hat view to fit into that system of values that they have anything that's positive about the Anglo-European formation of Australia. It's very hard for those with a white hat celebratory framing of Australia to acknowledge that some of the heroes engaged in atrocities as well. And what is difficult is to fit those two together. And so that's I had a very long back and forth with Claude.
Claude.
With Claude.
Your friend Claude.
My friend Claude, the AI. And doing what you guys have all heard me be cautious about AI, and I'm worried about the formation. I'm worried about the formation it's doing on me. But there's what I really like using AI for, and I'm just finding myself using Claude just to stick with one system. This is not a paid advertisement. Is the deep research tool that it can be. And so explain this concept to me. Okay, how does that fit with this concept? Still, what I asked it for during this conversation back and forth, I was trying not to use the word we. Me and the tool that is Claude it was feeding me a lot of information about different historians. So I asked it to research those who are more celebratory. What's their take? What are they saying? What are those who are more critical? Gave me some critical Australian historians and what they're trying to say. I asked it to formulate a steelman argument for a celebratory history in the case of these formative, what does it do, formation, our sense of nationhood and identity and values. And then I asked it to steelman the critical, how does a critical take work in terms of formation, nationhood, etc. And then what might a synthesis look like? How might you actually have a complex view? And so that was something I found really beneficial during the week as I was going back and forward on that. And curious, and this kind of maybe takes us into a few other conversations we want to have, because it knows my other conversations that we've had, searches that I've performed. It's very hard not to personalise it. It obviously brought in a whole lot of Christian framing because I hadn't brought up Christianity, but it knows that I'm a pastor. And so it brought in a whole lot of things that it thinks is relevant and keeps me in conversation with it. And it brought in the interesting illusion that it's like the Easter story. So we have this Friday and Sunday together. And it didn't talk about this, but I thought about the time every week where we do a confession in church as part of our liturgy, where we both recognise the sin that we've done, the things we ought not to have done, that we ought to have done, and the things we did do that we ought not to have done. And we confess and repent in the knowledge that we are also saved and whole and already forgiven and in Christ. And so I thought that was really interesting framing. It brought in some Paul Ricoeur and some other sort of philosophers along the way. But yeah, I'm still on the way and I'm still thinking, but I'm still trying to work out how to put together positive, negative, what does it look like, and to formulate our sense of identity out of that. That was a lot of talking.
That's right. I've got 2 questions for you though in regards to that, because I've got to think about which one I want to do first. But we kind of talked about like why so often we become tribal or want to be put in 2 camps around just any particular issue. And I just wonder about why we have such a fear about changing our minds. Like I probably do that too. I want to have the conversation to see if I do need to change my mind a lot of the time. Like that's why I enjoy doing this podcast and other things. So I think there is an inherent fear of having to change your mind. I think that's one thing you have to, like hegemony, we've talked about that before, all that kind of thing. But then the other thing I was going to ask you is that what, you've been reading, and I think it's one thing to change your mind a lot is reading, and also reading things that you think you may not like. We've talked about that concept before of reading behind enemy lines.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're doing that to a degree, and like as you research this, like your curiosity almost comes from what side do I sit on? That's the other funny thing, is it? So my question is what direction has this taken you? You're researching with Claude, doing your reading. What do you think the line that you're going on right now? It's a good change.
Well, I mean, and it's interesting because and this is again the reinforcing my own values. I have a value of being in the middle, not by taking the best, but by intentionally complexifying issues. And I think what's actually interesting is I have in the meta settings of Claude, I've kind of built in some of my values, and one of them is this idea of complexify. Don't show me where I'm wrong or something like that.
I challenge you or continue to open up new thought.
Yes, yeah. And it's interesting because I've noticed that even when I'm asking it simple questions, it'll then come in and go, but, and then there's been a few very times I haven't wanted to go complex. So then I just tell me the simple version, but because I've told it in the behind the scenes to always complexify things, it's complexifying things that don't need to be complexified.
Interesting.
And so I found that really interesting. I was like, oh, there you go. So that's maybe my value inbuilt into the system. And I think that's where I need to be careful, is that sometimes there is just black and white. So sometimes there are issues or ideas that are just wrong or just right. And I need to be aware of where I might be trying to hedge something that doesn't need hedging. So I think that's interesting. What was your original question? I can't remember.
Well, just where you're going in the direction of what you're researching right now.
Oh, right, yes.
While you are complexifying something.
Yeah. And I think this is what I found valuable about asking the tool to steel man both sides.
Yeah.
To give the best case argument. There's a proverb actually that you might be able to find it about the first one who speaks sounds right until the second one speaks or something, until the counter. I can't remember what the proverb is. But what it is saying is, the first opinion you hear, there's usually something true-ish about that. And so you go, yeah, that sounds right. But then someone comes along with the opposite and says, yeah, but hold on, what about this? Oh, that sounds right. But those two don't go together. So now I need to work through this. And I think that's what I quite enjoy that process of looking. Some listeners might be familiar. There's a series of books on different theological topics that are called, 3 views or 4 views on X, Y, Z. The thing I really like about those is because the authors all talk to each other. So they write their chapter and then all the other authors from the book respond to that chapter. And that does exactly what I really like, which is, here's a case. And you go, yeah, that sounds convincing. They've all quoted the Bible. They've made a consistent argument. I think that's right. And then you get the responders come in and go, yeah, but you haven't thought about this, you haven't thought about this. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. So, I quite like that is the case. So where am I sitting on this history thing? I don't know. I think one of the comments that was made about synthesizing was, let me just see if I can find it. Sorry, I can't. I'm not going to be able to find it.
I think I found the Proverbs.
Oh, yeah, what's the proverb?
18:17. This is the ESV version. The one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So, and this is why cross-examination is helpful. It's why it's good just to have different views. I really like an idea I picked up years ago called the anti-library. And the anti-library is books that you surround yourself with, whether physically or just you're aware of books, or you just go sit in the library, that you haven't read. And the idea is that it breeds a humility to know that someone has written on a topic that and therefore knows more about you than this topic. And I think that's where this kind of history idea. There are those with a very celebratory history. What are they seeing that if I'm more critical, I might be missing? And likewise on the other side, if there are critical authors out there, if I'm more of a celebratory history, what are they noticing? There are people out there who do not have a rosy picture, or what are they seeing that I might not be seeing? So even just being aware that there are legitimate arguments out there for the side other than you is just a really good place to be in. A biblical version would be Genesis 1. There are people who are way smarter than me with PhDs in an opinion vastly different to what I hold. And that's awesome. That's cool. I'm going to spend eternity with these brothers and sisters. They're not... So they understand this far better than I do and have a different opinion. And so that makes me more curious, not more frustrated. I think that's, I guess that's just kind of my temperament.
Well, I'm just thinking about, you said that there are some times where you do want just the plain and simple argument or facts, and kind of what is the actual answer rather than adding complexity to it. I was thinking about how we had David Stonestreet on last week, and he was talking about how one of the things he really appreciated reading Francis Schaeffer was that he didn't have to commit intellectual suicide. And Schaeffer refers to like a foundational argument, because he talks a lot about, as a Christian, how you're engaging with culture and coming up against people who disagree with Christianity and stuff. And he's like, there is truth spelt with a capital T, that Christianity is the total truth. So then everything else you can engage with. I think that's, hopefully I'm reading what he's saying correctly. So what I'm hearing from you is that there are, and it speaks to kind of God's character and what he's created in terms of there are things that we can debate and try and understand and enjoy and learn more about and get excited about. But then there's also the total truth, which is Jesus changes everything. As we like to say at Soul Revival Church, that he's the God of the universe, and his son died on the cross for us, as you're referring to Easter, because we need to be saved from our sins. And so I'm wondering, and this is going to come into a couple of other articles that you found earlier this week, how does that apply? And we were discussing the newcomers statistics last week as well with David, about how that plays out in churches and how newcomers are coming to church and whether they are actually coming to church. But how do you think that plays out when we want people to know about Jesus? We've got like this kind of idea of, do we go white hat, black hat? Well, I think we go white hat, black hat, or total truth, as we're saying, on one particular thing. It's very the gospel truth. But then how do we also show that there are going to be some differences of opinion, or there's going to be some differences of thought in terms of people at church, but also newcomers that are coming to church? I'd like to see what you think about that.
Yeah, so you sparked a memory. So one of the most helpful but also most difficult, and I don't think I understood at least 40% of it, books that I've ever read, was a book called What is a Person by Christian Smith.
Okay.
And he has a perspective there that I really like. So his position is called critical realist personalism. And so what this perspective is that so there's a realist aspect to it. So that is, reality exists independent of our knowledge of it. So truth is out there. Mm-hmm. But there's also a critical aspect here, which is that we only can access that truth by our own engagement with it. And your engagement with this objective truth and my engagement with this objective truth is subjective.
Okay. Yep.
So it's this combination of objectivity and subjectivity. So what it tries to avoid is the idea that, well, you're stupid, Joel. If you can't see it the way I see it, then you're just dumb. And if everyone just read this, they would all come to the same opinion. Mm-hmm. It avoids that, but it also, which would be a really strong objectivity. A really strong subjectivity would be, there is no truth out there. You've only got your truth. I've only got my truth. That's the only truth. And we'll just always talk past each other. So it tries to combine the best of both and avoid the worst of both of those, and says, no, there is an objective truth in there. And as a Christian Smith is like, no, God has created an actual world that's actually observable. And so the reality of the world, and we could say, you could stretch that out to the actuality of historic events, the actuality of society. There are actual things there, and we engage them personally. And so...
we engage them differently personally.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, that's right. And so actually, to the best way to try and get to a good understanding of objective truth is by getting as many of the subjective experiences together as possible. So there's a value in saying, you tell me what you observed there. Oh, that's really interesting. And I'll tell you what I observed there. And so you get someone who's more of a celebratory history person and say, what do you see in the first, 200 and whatever years we are in of the European settlement of Australia? And they will say, here's all these things, here are these wonderful things that a Europeanisation, is that a word, of the Australian continent has brought. And so they will celebrate all of these things. And then we can, to bring someone and say, well, you've got a critical aspect. Tell me what your critical post-colonial perspective is on this. And they will say, well, here's all these things. And actually by listening well to as many perspectives as possible, actually gets us closer and closer to what is there.
Which is why you love it so much.
Well, I mean, I think it resonates with me. But Christian Smith, again, I didn't understand at least 40% of what he was talking about. It's a very dense book to get through. But what I did understand, I think, if I understood what I read, really, really helpful in understanding, therefore, how do we function in the world and how do we understand topics. Now, come back to people coming to church. Are new people coming to church? Was that your question?
Well, it was more about, I think we were saying the articles, there's less, last week we were saying there's less people newcomers coming to church.
Yes.
And then but even if they are coming to church, and it was based on a couple of Michael Jensen articles that you sent me, is that how do we have the right posture so that we don't attract, well, it's not the people that we attract, that God's in charge of that. But how do we have the posture of welcoming, but also saying there is a total truth of Jesus? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So the Michael Jensen articles you referenced, these came out during the week as well. So the first one is called How Not to Be Weird to Newcomers at Church. And the second one that he wrote after a couple of people responded was How to Be Normal to Newcomers in Church. And the subtitle of that one, or at least know how to be weird in a good way. And they were, again, we've talked about welcoming before. We've done a whole mini-series on welcoming. People can go back and listen to that back in the archives. So this idea of not being weird, like not putting people off. And as you and I were talking off air about like some of these suggestions that he gives of what not to do.
Yeah, so don't start with politics.
Don't start with politics. Don't use this as your TED talk to talk about your own times or your theory of church decline. And some of them are so, like, you and I were reading the thing, this is so egregiously bad. Like, are there really people in the world that would start a conversation with a new person on these things? And it reminds me of some anti-bullying training that we had to do when I was at YouthWorks. And you watch these corporate videos of, so that the HR can tick off, we've all done, sex discrimination training, we've all done anti-bullying training. And they give you these scenarios of like, Joe did this to this woman, was this wrong? I'm like, who on earth would have thought that was the right thing to do or appropriate thing to do? Yeah. Are there people in the world who exist like this? But it is helpful to think about how do we do have new people coming. We had a new couple this weekend with their little baby who had found our Easter service on Instagram. And had come along and said, we've got no church background. We're just really curious about what actually happens in a church. Young couple, brand new baby, super excited. Like this is awesome. What did you guys think? And just chatting with them. And I don't know, maybe it's just because, we're used to welcoming new people that we haven't seen these kind of things in action but just to be, the second article is really, probably more helpful in terms of
it's kind of what to do.
So, just having a posture of welcome, listen in, lean in and be curious about the conversation. Let them sort of steer, know how to read the room and the person in a way that, you can, if they want to go deep, go deep. I had a conversation about a month ago now, a new guy came to church. It was like one kind of surface level question. And then all of a sudden he went real deep on some things that were going on for his life. And I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, I don't know you. You've never been here before. You've never been in this space before, but you're feeling safe enough to be vulnerable enough to go really deep, really quickly. And so that was a case where it's like, okay, well, let's lean in on this then. Not a topic that we would have brought up with another new couple. So with this other couple that came this week, it was very up and friendly and positive and, just checking things out. That's great. Just be curious. Is there any questions, anything weird that happened during the service that, you guys are wondering about? With a smile on my face, just, have those kinds of things. So, I thought it was a really good example, these two articles of, there's a really bad way of welcoming people. There's a really great way. Let's work out how to do this well. And the big takeaway is just be other person centric in this. Let the other person, have their time, not have their time. Don't be overbearing. Those kind of things. So.
And I think some of the things that we were talking about is, like you're saying, are people really this bad? And I'm wondering if Mr. Jensen wrote them, from certain behaviours that he's observed at his church or at many other churches. And so I suppose my question there is, how do we ensure that we don't become entrenched and used to what we're doing, that we don't welcome newcomers well? Because I suppose when I read that, my internal frustration was like, why would anyone else do that? Why would anyone do that? Like, how are you raised the point of the family coming and being really excited. It's easy to be welcoming to those people because they're open to it. I wonder if it might be harder to welcome newcomers to your church who have been in church for a long time. Or is it harder for people who have been at a church for a long time to be welcoming?
Right, okay.
I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. This is one of the positives and shadows, as we've often talked about before, of having church as a third place community. So people who have heard us talk about third place communities before, one of the important characteristics of a third place community is regulars and irregulars. And why this is important is because the regulars set the culture. And we actually want Christians to set the culture of our church. And we want people who are really bought in to the church and to the way that you do church, whatever your church looks like. You want people who are really bought into your culture. And for those people to set the tone and for them to be the welcomers and for everything to go on. the shadow of lots of regulars, what I meant to say. The shadow of lots of regulars is it can become like family, which is a positive. It can become like community, which is a positive. And you are often less guarded with friends and family and community than you would be in situations where you expect new people to be there. So one of the interesting points here in Jensen's first article was put internal church matters on hold. And this is, I have seen this happen where people, you're trying to chat with a new person, someone comes up and says, oh, have you fixed the photocopier yet? It's like, hey, have you met Joel? Joel's here for the first time. He's never been to church before. He's curious about what Christianity means.
He's a photocopier technician.
Yeah, well, that would be a bonus. And again, this is, I think, one of the shadows of having close church of people who have been around and lots of regulars is it would be appropriate if you were just having regulars for someone to say, hey, by the way, have you fixed the photocopier yet? Oh, thanks for the reminder. Yep, I've got someone coming on Tuesday. Oh, no, thank you. I have forgotten. I'm going to put it on my list now to make sure I call on Monday morning and get a technician over or to look at a new printer or whatever it is. And so there are situations when that's the case. When our regular dynamics are out of whack, way too many regulars and almost no irregulars, we can get really comfy. And I think that's where some of these mistakes can come from. I assume that everyone who walks in the door thinks like me, is like me, shares all the same values as me because we spend so much time with each other. And here's a new person. It hasn't quite registered for me that my comfortableness with this space actually means that some conversations are better had at other times. Now, the shadow of the opposite, if you have way too many irregulars and not enough regulars, is the irregulars start to shape your culture more than your regulars do. So what we want, a really healthy third place community, is the regulars are setting the culture, they're setting the tone, they're shaping the community and the values and the conversations, but with an outward expression where when new people come in or people who, they might be first time to your church, experience in other churches, or they might be first time to church full stop, and that's what we're seeing a lot of recently. They're open and savvy enough, socially aware enough to say, hey, let's have our regular conversation in a way that invites in these people, is curious about them, and makes them feel like they are welcome and a sense of belonging over time to this space, even while they're still in this irregular category. And so I think that's really key, to get that balance right between regularity, irregularity, and for the regulars to be outward looking. And so we've also talked before about the idea of friendship. We want to be friends at church. It's a really high value of our church. And it's a friendship that is outward focused rather than inward focused. And that's a really key thing here as well. You're on the lookout. You want to invite people into, again, sometimes it's actually physically, you've got a circle of 3 or 4 people and someone walks in the door, you widen the circle and say, oh, come in, hey, come and meet everyone. And sometimes it's, metaphorically, it's just being aware and looking out for those and the way that you welcome them in. Yeah,
because one of the ways that I kind of wanted to take this conversation was that how can we get better at that? Like, how do we get to the point where we maybe don't have to have an article, for example, written about what not to do when you're welcoming someone at church? And I'm always really fascinated, and perhaps to a fault, that I love strategy. I also love how people do things and learning how people do. How does that person's productivity system work? Or how do they get this done? Or how do they actually achieve this thing? And so we've often when you and I are just on the podcast, we catch up on the podcasts that we've listened to and then talk about them on this podcast, which is rather meta. But we've talked about Cal Newport before. I was listening to one of his podcasts because I'm enjoying some of the things he's doing around AI and helping me better understand how those things are going. But also I enjoy his idea of the deep life and working consistently on something. He had a podcast recently with Brad Stulberg, who is he's written a book, but he's also was a college athlete in football and he loved having that structure and discipline around his life. And then he realised he wasn't going to make it, particularly in the NFL, but also just even as a college athlete. So then he became a runner. He loved the discipline of that. And he finished college and just didn't know what to do when he ended up being a consultant. And then somehow, at some point, became a writer, moved his family to another city out of California, and then got into powerlifting. So squat, bench press, and what's the other one? I can't think of the other exercise. Anyway, his point, though, about his book is that... Deadlift, thank you. That's the other one. I enjoy doing the deadlift. The idea was that, and the actual thumbnail of the YouTube thumbnail of the podcast is forget hobbies, you need a practice. And Brad's point was, if it's a hobby, whatever you choose, like it might be knitting, it might be woodwork, it might be making knives. No, there's so many things. It might be powerlifting, it might be something like this, that if you make it a hobby, it's very easy for you to go, I don't feel like doing that today. Or I don't feel like this is a good use of my time. And his argument is, if it's a practice and you're trying to get 1% better every day, then that's actually infinitely more productive and useful to not just yourself but other people, and stuff like that. So I was wondering, how does that apply to us as Christians? And I was thinking about, in terms of this welcoming thing that you're saying, is that if we turn it into a practice, which I think is easier to do in a third space, like you're saying, that you are constantly coming in contact with other people who may not know Jesus or may not have been to church, or of other people that come and visit your church, things like that. But I'm wondering, can we turn that into a practice, that every time we meet someone, that, oh, what did we get better at today? And seeing it in that sense, rather than, I've got to meet that new person. I just wanted to come to church and just do the thing that I wanted to do, and be filled up meeting the people that I like talking to, instead of looking in a more positive light and having it. And I'm saying this to myself more than anyone, is how can I have a practice of like, let's welcome a new person, and how do I make them feel welcome? And sometimes people find it hard, and sometimes meeting new people is hard. Because they don't want to drive the conversation. You have to figure out ways to get the conversation moving. So maybe as a good way of like kind of wrapping up the episode and taking into account all the things we've talked about, how do we develop things like good practices? Whereas Christians, we're being sanctified by God all the time. That is maybe it's God's practice of sanctifying us all the time. How do we apply that to ourselves, and its particular welcoming? Is that, how can we get better?
Yeah, so the number of things going on there.
There was.
No, that's all right. So, yes, I think we can put these things into practice, and we can practice these things. Colin Buchanan has a great song called Practice Being Godly, which one of his earliest albums. And it is true that we ought to put into practice the things that are true of us. So, the fruits of the Spirit, let's practice these things because God is growing them in us. And this is kind of this, dual nature of what God is doing in our life, how we are engaged in that, and the way in which we are participants with God in the sanctification work that He is doing. And by His good delight and design, He allows us, encourages us, prompts us to be engaged in these processes as well.
I think it also speaks to, sorry to interrupt you, the either or element we're talking about is that God is both, or that God is total truth, and He allows us to investigate and find that objectivity and subjectivity, but also there's the black and white truth of who He is.
Yes.
I'm just adding to that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and again, these things, a lot of these complexities are true, that God does the work and we are engaged in practice of the work. They seem contradictory, and sometimes our systems overemphasize one to the detriment of the other. But we have a lot of these complexities in our Christian faith. The Trinity, 3 in 1. That's a complexity that doesn't actually make sense. Jesus being fully God and fully man, 100% God, 100% man, 100% Jesus, not 200%, not 50-50. Like, how does that work? We don't really understand. And so I think there's a similarity here in the way that we believe that God is sovereign and working in us and on us and through us, and also that we're engaged in that process as well. So
speaks to his character, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
This overwhelming character, like kind of what you were talking about, being a new creation. It's like this overwhelming thing that we cannot understand, but we get to live in it and
participate in. Yeah,
and there's a lot of joy in that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise, all of those, this is Paul's letters. The first half is often, this is who you are because of what Jesus has done. And the second half is, therefore live this way. And those two go together. God is the one who has done all the work, and you are, those commands of Paul would make no sense if we weren't actively engaged in our own sanctification. And so, it would make no sense for Paul to command us to put on things and, etc. And so, so we're doing these things. So specifically about welcoming, that we can practice being better at welcoming. We can learn skills. If you're not good at small talk, and I'm not good at small talk, but you can learn ways to ask the right questions. You can learn ways to listen well and reflectively respond. And that might be something that you might need to practice in, that you might need to practice listening to another person and responsively asking questions. Or you might need to have 2 or 3 questions that you need to learn and practice, practice in the mirror first and then try them out on people you already know and then come and try them out on strangers. Things that would just start to generate a conversation that will helpfully draw people in. So these are things that we can practice, and we do get better over time. And I do like this distinction between practice and hobbies, that being a welcoming community is not a hobby that you can sometimes do and sometimes don't, and it doesn't really matter if you don't get around to it this Sunday about not being a welcoming. Like, this is who we are. It is right to live consistently out of this, to recognise when we've failed to do that, and that's okay. To recognise that we're not always perfect at it. We might get it wrong, and that's okay. There are people who are not part of Soul Revival now who did not find us to be a welcoming community, and so, that's really interesting. Anecdotally, I think that that's probably the minority perception. My perception is that there's far more people who have found us to be a welcoming community than an unwelcoming community, but we haven't always got that right, and that's okay. So we're learning from that. We're trying to be practicing that, and we're trying to do it corporately together. And we did our series on welcoming. This is one of those things that we talked about, was not just having welcomers whose specific role, and therefore no one else has to think about it, but being a welcoming community. Everyone's a welcomer. Some people have particular responsibilities of being at the door and greeting and marking off the roll and showing people where the kids' rooms are and the coffee machine is and how to find afternoon tea or morning tea or breakfast or whatever it is. That yes, there are particular roles, but when everyone who is a regular is a welcoming regular and invites people into that, then, and does that well, and we're practicing doing that together, I think that's a really powerful way of being the China church community that can be a space for regulars and irregulars, and can start to create that, continue to create and foster. We're not perfect at it, but we're growing in it, of being a third place community.
We just had Sean Nolan preach at our church last weekend.
You did?
And he talked about as a church, we're inviting people at church to read his book, which is about it's walking with him, I think, or walking in his way, I think.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, walking with Jesus is the idea.
Yes,
walking in his way, I think is right.
And one of his main points in the sermon that when he was at Kirrawee on a Saturday night was what great things could God do in your life, and are you allowing him to do it, basically. He used a cool example of a woman called Phoebe who took the original Romans manuscript on a boat to Rome to deliver it to, obviously, who had to read it, and then for it to be disseminated, and what had come from that just that particular manuscript, and God had worked through that. But I think the thing that I liked the most, or the thing that I got out of your sermon the most, was that the only way that can happen is if you have a practice of reading God's word. These 3 points were reading God's word, praying, and being in Christian community. And I think that's the thing that I'm getting from here, is that if we have these ideas that we're not sure what side are we on, what tribe are we in, to look at what God is saying, because he transcends it all, and therefore we can hold those things more easily too, rather than having to rely on ourselves to be that black armband or white armband, or I'm on this side or on that side, or whatever the political divide or whatever it is. And I think therefore that allows us to be, like I'm saying, practice better welcoming as well, rather than here's my thing on end times, or let's talk about the latest political issue, or let's talk about your opinion of Iran and the Middle East, and all those things that can cause not to be welcoming, or even in church. I don't think we shouldn't not engage in those issues, but it's using that kind of practice that we're saying to use it at the right time as well. I think that's important. Can I ask you, Tim, as we wrap up the episode?
Yep.
What's a takeaway that people can take from this episode? Well, welcome to Tim's Takeaway Shop. Serving up a burger and chips.
Oh, could do with a burger and chips, actually.
Actually, it wouldn't be bad for lunch. I'm getting pretty hungry.
Yeah. Sean Nolan's book is called The Way He Walked.
The Way He Walked. Thank you for correcting me. Yes. Sorry about that, Sean.
No, that's all right. I'll take that apology on his behalf. And,
thanks. I'm sure he appreciates it.
Yeah. The takeaway. I think being curious about others. So that's going to that's going to tie together, these different views of history, being curious about why people see the world in different ways to you, and not as an opportunity to smack down their arguments, but actually from a perspective of actually genuinely learning from others, even when you ultimately disagree with them. And I think that may be something that's worth saying as well, that it doesn't mean that I won't end up with an opinion, but I will have a good idea of why those who think differently to me think the way they do. So being curious about others, and that will help with our welcoming as well. Yeah, someone walks in the door, "Hey, how you going? What brings you along today? Is this your first time in a church? You got any experience? Have you any experience with churches before?" That's one of the questions I often ask.
Oh, that's a good one.
Do you live locally? What do you do? Yeah, those kinds of just kind of open kind of questions, try to draw out some conversation, and being curious about hearing from them, knowing that they are valuable, that it's not just about, oh good, here's another person that I can download to, but here's another person who's made in the image of God, loved by Jesus, may or may not yet be part of his kingdom, but I get the opportunity to learn more about them. So being curious, being open, wondering, that's my takeaway.
Yeah, and God has given us the ability to do that.
Yeah.
Too, I think. So yeah, thank you very much, Tim.
You're welcome, Joe.
It's been a fun episode as usual. I appreciate you. And I hope it's been a fun episode for you if you're listening or watching. We really appreciate you coming along for the ride, as we say. You can go on the Shock Absorber website, shockabsorber.com.au, and join the Shock Absorber network. We'd love to have you on the mailing list where we can let you know when we're doing things together as a network. Having said that, you can also email me, joel@shockabsorber.com.au, if you want to engage with any of the things we've talked about today or in any other episode. And that will be it. But as always, Tim, we finish with a one way.
One way.
One way. Thank you.